Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of the recent headlines to reveal the real story behind the escalating clash in the Strait of Hormuz. You've probably seen the news alerts flashing on your phone about a conflict in the Middle East, right? Drones, helicopters, sunken boats, the whole shebang. But as our source material points out, those standard headlines are completely missing the deeper mechanics. Today, we're tracking the exact timeline of how cheap fiberglass boats and asymmetric tactics are actively manipulating the massive financial gears of our global economy. This isn't just some abstract story about foreign policy, it's literally a story about the complex systems that dictate the world's wealth.
Take a look at this number, $1.47. That is the exact jump in the national average for a gallon of gasoline in the United States just since late February. If you've been sitting in your car wondering why your tank suddenly costs so much more to fill up, well, here's your answer. It's incredibly easy to look at a naval clash in the Persian Gulf as this distant, totally disconnected geopolitical event. But the analysis we're digging into today connects those distant waters directly to your everyday wallet. For a two-car household, that price hike translates to hundreds of extra dollars a month. And that didn't just come out of nowhere. It's the direct result of a very specific chain of events, culminating in what the US government is calling Project Freedom.
Okay, let's dive into this. This quote from U.S. Central Command captures the core tension absolutely perfectly. On one hand, the stated mission of sending 15,000 U.S. service members and over 100 aircraft into the region is to, quote, restore freedom of navigation. But then there's the second half of that sentence, which the source notes is often entirely skipped by the major networks. It's a massive caveat, as we maintain the naval blockade. Our source neutrally highlights how this creates an immediate, glaring paradox. Think about it. The United States is simultaneously trying to squeeze Iranian oil exports to absolute zero, while essentially demanding that Iran allow everyone else's oil exports to flow freely through those exact same waters. To really understand that paradox, we've got to look at the timeline, because this certainly didn't happen overnight. It all kicked off on February 28th when the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. But interestingly, Iran didn't respond with a nuclear counterattack, they responded geographically. By mid-March, they had effectively blocked the Strait of Hormuz using a mix of mines, missiles, and fastboats. And that triggered the largest single supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. A pretty fragile ceasefire was reached on April 8th, bringing a brief pause. But that 60-day ceasefire was shattered on May 4th with the launch of the U.S. Project Freedom. According to the source, Project Freedom was initiated right while a fresh Iranian peace proposal was sitting on the table, which abruptly yanked the situation from a diplomatic pause right back into open naval combat.
And this brilliantly illustrates what that combat actually looks like, because when things resumed, it wasn't a traditional naval battle at all. On one side, you have the U.S. Navy, utilizing $2 billion Arleigh Burke destroyers and $1 million Standard missiles. On the other side, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Navy leans entirely into asymmetric warfare. Swarms of cheap 25 to 40-foot fiberglass boats equipped with RPGs and anti-ship cruise missiles. Our source points out the stark, almost absurd cost exchange ratio here. I mean, firing a $2 million defensive missile at a boat that costs less than a used Honda Civic, that is a financial and strategic nightmare. Iran doesn't need a massive conventional blue water navy to assert control. They just need to deploy enough cheap swarms and mines to make the waters completely uninsurable for commercial shipping.
So why are these tiny boats so effective? It comes down to this number, 21. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide at its absolute narrowest pinch point. And within that pinch, the actual designated shipping lanes are even narrower. Despite this incredibly tight squeeze, roughly a fifth of all the oil consumed by the entire world every single day must pass through this specific sliver of salt water. There's literally no viable detour. Sure, pipeline networks exist, but they can't handle even half of the volume that normally goes through the strait. It is the ultimate geographic choke point. Whoever controls these 21 miles fundamentally controls a massive portion of the planet's energy supply.
Now, the U.S. naval blockade has devastated Iranian crude exports, starving them by over 90%. Washington is using this as a heavy lever to force Tehran to the negotiating table. But from Tehran's perspective, this collapse in their exports is exactly the justification for their closure of the strait. The source actually describes this strategy through the lens of game theory as mutually assured oil destruction. If Iran is forbidden from selling its oil, well, it'll just use its geographic advantage to forbid everyone else from selling theirs. The global market completely understands this equation, realizing that simply flooding the strait with military helicopters doesn't actually fix the underlying massive supply gap.
So, when the world's most critical oil route is suddenly disrupted, who actually pays the price and who cashes in? The analysis provides a very objective breakdown here. The clear losers are American drivers and trucking companies, and that will likely trigger a rise in core inflation and delay any interest rate cuts simply because grocery and transport prices lag right behind the cost of diesel. On the flip side, there are some distinct winners. Israel achieves its strategic goals of bottling up Iran's proxies and crippling its revenue. But in a wild twist of unintended consequences, Russia actually emerges as a surprise winner, using the disruption to narrow the discount on their sanctioned crude, bringing in fresh revenue. Yet, the absolute biggest financial winner of all, they're sitting right here in the United States.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of this windfall for the U.S. oil and gas sector. A Permian Basin shale well has a break-even price of roughly $50 a barrel. But with the Strait of Hormuz disrupted, crude spiked to over $106 a barrel. That means every single barrel pumped out of Texas or North Dakota right now is wildly profitable. The source notes that major U.S. oil companies are already announcing massive share buybacks, setting themselves up for potentially their largest cash flow quarter in history. It's a fascinating paradox, right? The exact same geopolitical crisis that is severely straining the average consumer's household budget is simultaneously generating a historic profit margin for domestic shale producers.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Because if this rapid escalation from a naval skirmish straight to consumer price spikes feels a bit familiar, well, that's because we've lived through this exact loop before. The source draws a direct, undeniable parallel to the 1980s tanker war and Operation Earnest Will. The pattern repeats almost line by line. Step 1. A regional ally comes under attack and asks Washington for help. Step 2. The administration launches a large naval mission with a values-laden name. Earnest Will back then, Project Freedom now. Step 3. Asymmetric warfare immediately ensues, with mines and small boats causing incredibly outsized economic damage. And finally, Step 4. The price of oil moves sharply, and the global consumer pays for it. Sure, the technology has evolved to include sophisticated drones and better missiles today, but the underlying historical loop? That remains completely unchanged.
So why does the U.S. consistently commit to this cycle decade after decade? So the crucial point is, the answer actually lies way beneath the surface of the military conflict, resting in the macroeconomic system known as the Petrodollar guarantee. Back in 1973, a fundamental bargain was struck. The U.S. would act as the ultimate security guarantor for the Gulf's oil choke points. In exchange, Middle Eastern producers agreed to price and sell their global oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. That system is literally the bedrock that makes the U.S. dollar the global reserve currency. It's the reason U.S. government debt is so stable, and honestly, it's the reason your mortgage rate is what it is today. It's an arrangement of immense, foundational global power. According to the analysis, Project Freedom isn't just about deterring Iran. It is a highly visible defense of that entire dollar system. The true audience for this naval operation isn't just Tehran, it's the rest of the world. Washington is signaling to nations like China, India, and Russia that it is still the only entity capable of keeping global energy flowing, reinforcing exactly why the world should keep pricing oil in dollars. However, rivals are watching the chaos closely and actively accelerating non-dollar energy trades, like China buying oil in yuan or India buying in rupees. Every single year this geographic choke point is put at risk, it incentivizes global powers to de-dollarize their economies. And that is the massive structural cost hiding quietly behind this immediate conflict. As we wrap up this explainer, the source leaves us with some critical, unresolved metrics to watch as this whole situation develops. First, keep a very close eye on maritime insurance rates. If they climb too high, the strait effectively closes, regardless of any military presence. Second, there's the legal timeline to consider. Will the U.S. Congress actually address the War Powers Resolution Clock, or will this just remain a legally undeclared conflict? And finally, the absolute most dangerous metric. Will this escalation spread beyond the Gulf, drawing in other vital choke points like the Red Sea? Because the Battle of Hormuz is about so much more than a few sunken boats. It is quite literally a battle over the future of the dollar itself. So, what do you think happens next? Keep an eye on those insurance rates and always keep questioning what's beneath the surface.